Yes. I am Reverend Karen Lewis, and I am so delighted to be here. When we pick those talk titles, we do need to remember that they work us for a lot longer than they work all y'all. Ooh, it's been a week. It has been a week of really being reminded that grace can hardly be put into words. That grace, in those moments when we feel it, when we feel one with the one in the one, when we are close to source, words are not necessary because we are right there. And as we travel the upward spiral, when we find ourselves in that place far away from source, this is source right here, right? Here's source, the vortex of it. When we are on the upward spiral far away from it, words are often so shallow and empty. And so that created a little bit of a challenge for me, as the talk title today is Eternal Grace. If I don't have the words, what can I offer? How can I give the gift that Reverend Leslie so beautifully just sang about, to remind all of us that source is everywhere present, even when we feel lost, lonely, removed from it. And so what came to me was that it takes an experience for us to feel it. And so today we are going to start off with a process that I invite you and hope you're willing to go with me on, a journey of sorts. And then I'm going to share some stories of how I have experienced grace and how others have experienced grace. And I trust that there's something in all of that that serves you. And so we begin where we begin always, with a breath. I invite you to breathe into the place of the Most High, perhaps arranging the body to feel most comfortable as we just simply allow our eyes to close and our hearts to open. And don't worry, everybody has their eyes closed. Nobody is looking. And allowing that breath to fill our heart space. And we allow to come to mind that image of the spiral, this upward spiral that we each are on, that journey of our lifetime to know more of the divine, to recognize that grace is truly everywhere present. And we take a moment and just for our own benefit, ask ourselves, where might I be? Am I close to the warmth, to the fire, or am I in a space removed? And if we can do that, to honor it without being lost in it, we are able to find compassion for ourselves. And now I invite us to think about those people who are part of our lives, our families, our friends, our community, the world at large. and ask ourselves, where might they be, these individuals? Where might they be on this upward spiral? Are they close to the fire, or are they perhaps away from it at the moment? And notice how compassion naturally flows. We are not to know where another is. We can't know. But we can have compassion and send them love. And so we do that with another breath. And then very gently coming back to the place where we started this journey of the mind from, perhaps here in the sanctuary, at home, a place. That is the journey we are taking today, bestowing compassion on one another. And I like to start with the story of a man who died and came to the pearly gates. And St. Peter is right there to greet him. And St. Peter said, this is how this works. It takes 100 points to open those pearly gates. You tell me what you have done, and I tell you how many points you get for that. And by the time you reach 100, the gates open, and you're in. That sounds really good, says the man. Great. Okay, let's see. I was married for 35 years to my wife, and I never cheated on her, not even in my heart. Great, said St. Peter. That's 3 points. Okay, well, I attended church, and I tithed on all my income. Okay, St. Peter said, that's 1 point. All right, well, let's try this. I started a soup kitchen, and every week we fed people who were less fortunate, and it's still going on even though I'm not there anymore. Yeah, good, said St. Peter. That's 2 points. Oh, and by this time, the man is like, oh, for crying out loud. If this keeps going like this, it will take the grace of God for me to get in there. And just like that, the gates open, and St. Peter walks. I love that story. And here is why I like it. I mean, we are centers for spiritual living. Our religion is science of mind. We believe that heaven is not some place where there are pearly gates in front of it. Rather, we believe that heaven is a place, a state of consciousness, and it is available to each one of us at every moment. But here is what that story says to me. All that hustling that we do, all that being good girls and good boys, all this trying to understand all the rules so we can either follow them or break them, none of it has anything to do with the grace that is bestowed upon each and every person all the time. The eternal grace of the divine is always, always right where we are. And so heaven then becomes this awareness of it. That is what opens the gates every moment. I found this definition of grace, eternal grace. Never-ending divine influence which operates in humans to regenerate and sanctify, to inspire virtuous impulses, and to impart strength to endure trial. And when I read that, especially the endure trial part, I was reminded of a very young Karen. I was 29, something like that, 29 years old, and I had a 2-year-old daughter who is now a mom herself. And at that time in my life, if this is the source, I was like over there, so somewhere over there. And in this one particular evening, Stephanie had been sick, and she had run a fever. She was running a fever, so I was comforting her because she was feeling really uncomfortable and cranky and crying. And all of a sudden, she had a seizure. And her eyes rolled back in her head, and she became stiff as a board, like her whole body was rigid. And I thought she died. So I called 911, and I screamed. And I haven't thought about this in so long. And the woman who answered the 911 call said to me, after I told her what had happened, she said, "She didn't die. She has a fever seizure. She's going to be okay. You need to be there when she comes out of it and hold her." And that's what I did. And that is exactly what happened. What felt like an eternity, it was probably a minute. And she came back out, and she was crying, and I was so grateful. That moment, I discovered grace. The grace of another knowing, and I was able to lean into it. In those moments, and we have all had those trials in our lives, where we don't know if we can keep going. We don't know if there is another side at the end of the storm. To be able to lean into eternal grace, to trust. That experience had a lot of potential for me to feel that it was somehow my fault, that somehow I was being punished. Because it was a time in my life where I was very much aware of what I used to call at that time my sins, my wrongdoings. And I was shown something, and I held on to that. Nadia Bolz-Weber, she's a Lutheran pastor, says this: God's grace is not defined as God being forgiven to us even though we sin. We would call that as though we miss the mark. Grace is when God is a source of wholeness, which makes up for my failings. My failings hurt me and others, and even the planet. And God's grace to me is that my brokenness is not the final word. My brokenness is not the final word. And that, beloveds, reminds me of another story. It reminds me of a water carrier who would carry 2 big pots of water at the end of a pole for a very long path up the hill to his master's house. One of the pots was perfect. It was delivering the full load of water every day as the carrier man carried him up there. The other one had a flaw. It had a crack, and it would lose water. And so for 2 years, this man daily would go down to the river, fill up the 2 pots of water, and then walk up the hill to the house. And when he arrived there, one pot was full and the other one was half empty. Now the full pot, the perfect one, of course, was very proud because it was fulfilling its mission in life. The other pot felt ashamed. And one day, at the river, it spoke to the carrier. He said, "I'm so ashamed, and I'm so sorry, and I have to apologize." And the carrier said, "For what?" And he said, "You do all this work, and you only left with half of the load because of my flaw." And the water carrier says, "Okay, today I invite you to look at the path as we go up the hill and notice the flowers that are growing." And so, walk up the hill. The pot does see the flowers and the warming sun on the beautiful colors, and it makes him feel a little better. But still, when they arrived at the house, it was half empty. And he says, I feel embarrassed and ashamed." The water carrier said, "I have known about your flaw. I have known about the crack. And unbeknownst to you, I have planted seeds of wildflowers all the way up the hill. Did you notice that there are only flowers on your side and no flowers on the other side of the path? Because of your flaw, every day I'm able to grace the table of my master with beautiful flowers, which we wouldn't have had you not had this flaw, this crack." Beloveds, we are all cracked pots. And if we allow life to use what we consider a flaw, we can grace tables, relationships, communities, life, with what is possible, especially because of those flaws. We are all on a journey. These last couple of days, we had two beautiful journeys on our labyrinth right here at the Tatum campus. We had an evening walk where we had candles. One of the classes went on a forgiveness kind of a walk through the labyrinth. And then yesterday we had facilitated labyrinth walk by our beloved Susan Powell, which was just beautiful. And Sue read words from Carolyn Joy Adams, the very Carolyn Joy Adams who became a partner of this community today. Yes, and I want to read these to you. "Your life is a sacred journey. It is about change, growth, discovery, movement, transformation, continuously expanding your vision of what is possible, stretching your soul, leaning to see clearly and deeply, listening to your intuition, taking courageous risks, embracing challenges at every step on the way. You are on the path exactly where you're meant to be right now. And from here, you can only go forward, shaping your life story into a magnificent tale of triumph, of healing, of courage, of beauty, wisdom, power, dignity, and love." That, beloveds, is the invitation. For us to take our entire being what we perceive as the good and the cracks, and allow life to live through us. I am so grateful we are on this journey together. Thank you. So let us come together and anchor this in prayer. I invite all of the practitioners, the ministers, everybody, anybody, each and every one of us who is called to take a stand, to recognize that they are truly living heaven on earth right here, right now. Please rise and stand with me as I speak a spiritual mind treatment, our form of affirmative prayer. And so we begin by recognizing the allness of life. We begin by recognizing that there is only one activity taking place right here, right now. It is the eternal loving kindness, the eternal givingness, and the eternal grace of that which is greater than we are. And so as we come together, as we answer the call that has been placed deep on our soul, we open our minds and hearts to that grace, to that love. Recognizing that sweet spirit at every moment shows up in a smile, in a beautiful flower, in a loving word, in silence. And so it is from this place of deep knowingness that I speak a word for all the beloveds who have ever been part of this New Vision Center, for all of the beloveds who don't even know that it is here yet, and yet they feel a calling placed upon their heart to know more of the divine. I speak a word for all of the prayer requests that are being supported by this beloved community, by our practitioners, by the congregant care team. I speak a word for all of the perfect and all of the cracked pots that are here. And recognizing that depending on where we are on that upward spiral, we are perfect regardless of how that looks. And so we open our hearts to the gifts, to the goodness, to love, to life. Placing this word into universal law, I know it is done, it is complete. It is already so. And together we know this truth as we say, and so it is.